Have you ever wondered why did God look at creation and say that it was good when he knew what would happen to it? Was it so that we could change the way we see and perceive things? This is your host Lenu and welcome to the DNA series on identity. Today's portion starts from Genesis 1 verses 4 toward the end of the chapter where we see the creation account. We see how God created light and day, sky, sun and moon, the land, the seas, and even created his image bearer, which is man. And each day, as the day ended, God saw and inspected what he saw on what he created. He saw that it was good. God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that the beautiful and perfect creation that he had made would soon be subject to sin and destruction. Yet, he says that it was good. He knew that man, created in his own image and likeness, would soon disobey him and subject entire mankind into fall. And yet he looks at man and he says that it is good. The truth of the matter is, whatever God creates, he creates good, even you and me. Now, is that our reality? What do you think when you think about yourself? What comes to your mind when you see the world around you or the situations you find yourselves in? Most of us rarely can find anything that we call good. But what if we need to change the way we see? You see, God always looks for the good in people, and he always sees them from the vantage point of who they will be. God always calls us by our identity and not by what we do. And to explain this further, let's take a look at the life of Gideon. You see, Gideon was hiding from the Midianites and he was threshing wheat in the winepress. He says, by himself that he is the weakest, he's from the weakest clan in Israel, and he's the weakest in his family. Yet God looks at him and calls him by his identity, which was a mighty warrior. God saw what he created Gideon for and called him as such. Now, Jesus always knew that Peter would deny him, but we never find Jesus calling Peter a denier. Instead, he calls him by his identity that he would later on encourage the saints. Do we see people the way God sees? Are we calling people into a higher revelation of how God sees them? Do we as a people call others into the identity that God created them for? Or are we as a people limited by what we see in the natural and declare those things from a first heaven perspective? You see, God always operates from the third heaven perspective, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And the challenge for us as Christians and as his children is to align the way we see and perceive things to the way how he sees. This is part of our identity, to be able to call things into being, despite what has been manifested in the natural, and to call it into its identity. Now, if we go further down chapter 1 of Genesis, we see a Genesis mandate. Now, God mandates the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the animals, and even man created in his own image to produce after its own kind and to be fruitful. This is the Genesis mandate. So, from that point on, a whale always produced a whale. A fish that is in the sea did not produce a bird. An eagle produced an eagle. A lion produced a lion. Now, what has that got to do with us? You see, God also produced after his own kind, and that was man. He created us in His image. So we are a part of the God kind. And that is something that is really powerful when we realize that we are of the God kind. See, God is always fruitful in what He creates. And that same identity has been passed on to us to be fruitful in everything that He has entrusted to us. Now we are to multiply what God has given us, whether it's our talent, whether it is anything that God has put in us. Our mandate and our identity is to be fruitful in it and to multiply. So the ability to see others and to see the world around us the way God sees it, and to be able to produce good and lasting fruit is part of who we are. It's part of our identity. So let us walk in what God has already created us to be. Let us walk in that identity of calling things as they are, according to not what we see in the natural, but according to what God has created something to be, and be fruitful in whatever God has entrusted us. Remember, we are made in His identity. We are made in His DNA. You are designed and accepted by God.